All right, so we're back for part 3 of our deep dive into propaganda detection.
Yeah, we're really getting into the advanced stuff now.
That's right. Last time we were looking at tools that could help us spot those persuasive techniques, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this time, we're going even deeper.
We're talking NLP, natural language processing.
NLP, so like teaching computers to understand how we use language to persuade each other.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. So the sources mention this thing called presuppositions. What are those?
So presuppositions, those are those kind of sneaky linguistic tricks that imply something is true without actually coming right out and saying it.
Oh, sneaky.
Yeah.
So like, give me an example.
Okay, so for example, you hear someone say, everyone knows that.
Oh, yeah.
They're assuming that everyone shares that knowledge.
Right.
Even though it might not actually be true.
So it's like they're trying to smuggle in their own assumptions without you even realizing it.
Exactly. And the cool thing is NLP can be used to like automatically detect these things.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So imagine like you're reading a news article or watching a political speech, and a little flag pops up every time there's a presupposition. That would be amazing. That would be like having a built-in BS detector.
Right, and it would help you be a much more critical reader.
Yeah, definitely. The sources also mentioned something called factive verbs. What are those?
So factive verbs, they're verbs like know or realize, discover, things like that.
Okay.
And they often signal that there's a presupposition going on.
Oh, I see.
Because they kind of imply that something is inherently true.
So if I read a headline that says scientists discover proof of climate change denial,
right,
that word discover is a factive verb. And that would kind of make me think, is there really proof, or are they just assuming that there is?
Exactly. It helps you question those underlying assumptions.
Wow, this is already making me think about how I read the news in a whole new way.
That's great. It's all about becoming more aware.
The sources also mentioned detecting temporal clauses.
Right.
What are those and how do they work?
So temporal clauses, they're phrases that have to do with time, like after the incident or before the election.
Okay.
And they can be tricky because they presuppose that those events actually happened.
Even if they didn't?
Even if they're disputed or unproven.
So if someone says after the protests turned violent, the police were forced to intervene, that phrase, after the protests turned violent, that's a temporal clause.
Exactly.
And it's assuming that the protests actually did turn violent.
Right, which might not be the case at all.
It's like they're sneaking in their own version of events.
It's all about making those hidden assumptions explicit so you can decide for yourself.
Whether they're justified.
Right.
This is fascinating, and the sources also mentioned one more type of tricky verb.
Okay.
Change of state verbs.
Yeah, change of state verbs, they're words like stop or begin or continue.
Okay.
And they can imply that something was already happening before. Like if someone says he stopped lying about his involvement, that word stopped implies that he was lying in the first place.
Even if they don't actually say that.
Exactly.
It's like baking those assumptions right into the grammar.
Right. It's subtle but powerful.
Wow. And this tool would be able to like point that out and say, hold on, let's unpack this assumption.
Exactly. It helps you see those hidden premises.
This is incredible. We've barely scratched the surface and my mind is already blown.
Well, there's a lot more to explore, but I think it's clear that these tools have incredible potential.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to see where we go next with this.
Me too.
So for now, listeners, we're going to take a quick break, but we'll be back soon with more on these fascinating tools and what they can do.
Stay tuned.
Okay, so we're back and ready to dive even deeper into this world of advanced propaganda detection.
Yeah, things are about to get really interesting.
So in the last part, we talked about presuppositions and all those sneaky verbs and clauses.
Right, the factive verbs, temporal clauses, change of state verbs.
Yeah, exactly. All those little linguistic tricks that can really shape our thinking without us even realizing it.
And we talk about how NLP can be used to spot those things.
Right, but how exactly do these tools work? What's going on under the hood?
Well, one of the key approaches is the use of heuristics. Have you heard of that term?
Heuristics, yeah, I've heard of it, but I'm not exactly sure what it means.
So heuristics, they're basically like rules of thumb.
Okay.
They help us quickly identify potential red flags in language.
So like if I see a phrase like everyone knows or it's obvious that.
Right, those are classic examples.
My internal BS detector starts going off.
Exactly, and we can program those same rules of thumb into NLP systems.
So we're teaching computers to think like skeptical readers, looking for those subtle clues that something might be fishy.
That's a great way to put it.
And the sources mentioned something about using regular expressions for this.
Yeah, regular expressions, those are powerful tools for searching and manipulating text. And we can use them to create these automated detectors for all sorts of persuasive techniques.
So it's like giving the computer a cheat sheet of all the things to watch out for.
Yeah, and it can scan through tons of text and flag anything that looks suspicious.
That's incredible. And the sources also talk about how we can tailor these heuristics to different types of content.
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. So the rules for spotting propaganda in a political speech might be different from those used to analyze a news article or an advertisement.
Exactly. Each type of communication has its own unique set of persuasive strategies.
So it's like we're assembling a whole team of digital detectives, each with their own area of expertise.
I like that analogy.
But how do we make sure that these tools are actually accurate and unbiased?
That's a really important question, and it's something that researchers are constantly working on.
Because, they're being created by humans who have our own biases and perspective.
Absolutely, and that's why it's crucial to have diverse teams working on these systems.
So not just computer scientists, but also linguists, ethicists, people from different backgrounds.
Right, we need to bring in a wide range of perspectives to ensure that these tools are fair and balanced.
And even then, we need to be constantly testing and refining them.
Exactly, it's an ongoing process.
We need feedback from users to help us identify potential errors or biases.
And as we get more data, we can keep improving the accuracy and reliability of these tools.
This is all incredibly impressive, but there's one thing we touched on earlier that I want to go back to.
Okay.
How do we adapt these tools to different languages and cultures?
That's a huge challenge, and it's one of the most exciting areas of research in this field.
Because what might be persuasive in one culture could be completely ineffective or even offensive in another.
Exactly. It's not just about translating keywords. We need to understand the cultural nuances that shape how people communicate and persuade each other.
So like in some cultures, correctness is valued, while in others it's seen as rude.
Right, and those cultural differences can have a huge impact on how we interpret persuasive language.
So we need to train these systems to be culturally sensitive, recognizing that what might sound like a manipulative technique in one context could be perfectly normal in another.
That's right, and thankfully we have tools like multilingual BERT models that can help us with this.
BERT models, those are the ones that are trained on massive amounts of data from multiple languages.
Exactly, and they can help us analyze and understand language across different cultures.
So it's like we're building a global network of persuasion detectives, each with their own expertise in their local context.
That's a great way to think about it.
It's amazing to think that we can actually build tools that can help us understand how persuasion works on a global scale.
And as we develop these tools, we're not just learning about propaganda, we're learning about the human mind and how it works.
It's like we're peeling back the layers with human communication, revealing all those subtle mechanisms that drive our thoughts and beliefs.
And ultimately, that knowledge can help us become more resilient to manipulation and more confident in our own ability to think critically.
This has been an incredible journey so far, and I can't wait to see what we uncover in the final part of our deep dive.
Me neither, we're just getting started.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into advanced propaganda detection.
We've covered a lot of ground already.
We have. It's amazing to think about all the subtle ways that language can be used to influence us.
It really is, but now we're getting into even trickier territory.
Oh, how so?
Well, the sources mention sarcasm, irony, and humor as being particularly challenging areas for these tools.
Ah, I see. Yeah, those are tricky even for us humans sometimes.
Exactly. Like, we've made a lot of progress in teaching computers to understand the literal meaning of words.
Right.
But sarcasm and irony, they require a whole other level of understanding.
Because it's not just about what's being said, it's about the intent behind the words.
Yeah, it's about recognizing when someone is saying one thing but meaning something completely different.
So how do we even begin to teach a computer to understand that?
Well, one approach is to focus on those telltale signs of sarcasm, like,
Like what?
exaggerated language, unexpected punctuation,
Okay.
emojis.
Like all those dripping sarcasm quotes with a bunch of exclamation points and a winky face?
Exactly. Those are often pretty clear indicators.
So we can teach these systems to look for those patterns.
Right. But of course, it gets a lot more difficult when the sarcasm is more subtle.
Yeah, when there are no obvious clues.
Those cases are tough, even for us humans to catch.
So what do we do then?
Well, for those more subtle cases, we need to bring in the human element.
Okay.
The sources suggest combining machine learning with human feedback.
So it's like a team effort. The NLP systems flag anything that might be sarcastic.
Right.
And then human experts come in and provide feedback to help the system learn and improve.
That's the idea. It's a continuous loop of learning and refinement.
And over time, these systems can get better and better at recognizing sarcasm, even in those tricky cases.
That's the hope. And, they might even start to pick up on other cues, like the author's past behavior.
Right, or the overall tone of the conversation.
Exactly. It's like they're learning to read between the lines, not just of individual sentences, but of entire online personas.
That's incredible. And speaking of online personas, the sources also talk about another big challenge.
What's that?
Visual propaganda.
Ah, yes, that's a huge one.
Especially with memes and videos, it's like they're everywhere these days.
And they can be incredibly powerful because they tap into our emotions in a way that words sometimes can't.
Right. It's like every time I scroll through social media, I'm bombarded with images and videos designed to trigger a reaction.
Whether it's outrage, fear, excitement, you name it.
Exactly. So how do we even begin to adapt these tools to deal with that?
Well, we need to expand the scope of propaganda detection beyond just text.
Okay.
We need tools that can analyze the visual elements of these messages.
So understanding the symbolism,
Mm-hmm.
the emotional cues,
The persuasive techniques being used?
it's like we're entering a whole new dimension of analysis.
We are, and it's a rapidly evolving field.
Yeah, it seems like every time we go up with a new way to detect propaganda, they come up with a new way to create it.
It's like an arms race.
And in this arms race, knowledge is our best defense.
I agree. By understanding the techniques that are being used to influence us, we can become more resilient to manipulation.
And more confident in our own ability to think critically.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
Well, I think the most important thing is to stay curious, stay skeptical, and never stop asking questions.
I like that. Don't take anything at face value. Dig deeper. Look for evidence.
And be wary of those who try to appeal to your emotions without providing any real substance.
It's about recognizing that we're all constantly being bombarded with messages that are trying to influence us.
And taking an active role in filtering that information.
It's about being informed, engaged, and critical thinkers.
This has been an incredible journey, and I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, listeners, the fight against misinformation is an ongoing battle. Stay vigilant and stay informed.
That's right, and on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of advanced propaganda detection.
Until next time.
Stay curious and stay informed.